Welcome to Vibe Check, a place where we have open, honest, and authentic conversations about the human side of business. Our goal here is to help you achieve better business outcomes with people-led initiatives. And to get there is only room for real talk and genuine advice. No sugarcoating allowed. So, what's a vibe check? It's a phrase for asking, how are you doing, really? It opens the door to meaningful conversation between colleagues, professionals, but most importantly, human beings. My name is Jeannotte, or JJ for short, and I am your host for this series. My mission in life is to help organizations understand the value of placing their people at the heart of their strategy and their business. And that's exactly what you can expect from our Vibe Check chats. Let's get right into it. So our guest today is Martine Massarelli. Martine, hi, and welcome to Vibe Check.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, we're delighted to have you on the show. So, by means of introduction, Martine is an experienced HR pro. She's got a passion for helping people grow, and she has over a decade of experience in HR. Right now, she's the Director of People and Culture at LG2. So for those who are listening and don't know LG2, they are a 100% independently owned agency, and they're actually the largest independent creative agency in Canada with a team of over 500 beautiful people. So let's kick this off. As the tradition goes, we have to start with the vibe check question. So I must ask you, Martine, on this cloudy morning in Montreal, how are you doing, really?
I'm doing super well. I'm really excited to get started. It's funny, right up until right now, I wasn't feeling nervous at all. And I just had a little bit of nerves that kicked in, but I think once we get into it, I'll be good to go back in business.
Of course, there's always that little, a little bit of excitement and butterflies that kind of show up. And then once we get into the conversation, it flows. Well, I feel the same. There's always like a little bit of excitement. So I echo your thoughts and your feeling. I'm super excited as well for today's conversation because we're going to talk about a topic that I think is close to both of our hearts and our experience as HR pros. So we're going to discuss how we can leverage the opportunities that are created from having a multi-generational team. That's on everyone's lips right now, right? It's
Yeah.
like it's the buzz. It's the topic. So I'd love for us to dive into the conversation, but also prepare our audience who's listening to really understand a little bit how we're going to structure this conversation. So we're going to talk about l'incontournable, as we say in French. We can't not talk about how we attract employees from different generations. Then I want to steer us into keeping those employees engaged and motivating these different generations to work together. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Amazing. So let's kick it off. Let's talk about attraction. So as I said before, your team is composed of 500 professionals. So you've got 50 people in the Toronto office or around the Toronto area, 415 in Montreal, and 55 in Quebec City. Your main domain of expertise at LG2 as a creative agency revolves around advertising, shopper marketing, strategy architecture, branding design, content, e-commerce, and many, many more. And my understanding is that half of LG2's employees actually arrived just before or during, shortly after the pandemic, and you've grown 57% over the last 3 years, right? Did I get that
Yeah.
right?
It's incredible. It's incredible the growth that we've seen in just a short period of time.
That's huge. And that comes with a lot of consequences, good, bad, sometimes ugly.
There's definitely a lot of changes that an organization sees when it's been rolling at a certain cadence, a certain structure, a certain size for so many years because LG2 is not a new company. We've been around for some 30 years, and now to see it grow so much is bringing about some important changes, but also a vibe of freshness, new air, new blood, new spirit. So it's really exciting to see.
New experiences, new background. It's like it's a wealth of, beauty, I find.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ask you, what do you think makes Gen Z, because we can't avoid talking about that beautiful generation, what do you think what makes them choose your organization when they're fresh out of school?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we can speak to LG2 or we can speak to any company really at LG2. I think there's about 10%, maybe a bit more of our workforce and growing, of course, that is Gen Z,
Mhm.
fresh out of school. Um, we definitely have an attractive internship program. So that kind of gives people the real experience of working with us, real hands-on kind of approach. But I think if you're looking outside of the internships, and the way to get hands-on is you have to catch people's attention.
Mhm.
And with Gen Z, I don't think that we can escape the presence, the omnipresence even of social media in their day-to-day lives and the availability of information. One thing that I see a lot with younger people is their ability to do their homework.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of research and there's a lot of talk online and amongst friends about different organizations, what it's like to work somewhere, a lot of word of mouth. So I think this younger generation, this Gen Z, is really having more of an opportunity to kind of do their research, be
Mhm.
selective, and kind of vet the companies that they want to work for.
Yeah, it's serious business for them, as you say. And then
Hmm.
the reputation that you have and your brand as an employer is very important just because
Hmm.
they were born with cell phones in their hands. Like I can speak being mom of a newly teenager. She turned 13 this past Sunday, and it's crazy. Like I really watch their interaction with technology, and it's completely different to what you and I experienced. Like
Hmm.
I was in high school when email was, a thing, started to be a thing.
Yeah, not to date ourselves too much, but yeah.
Not too much, but like obviously it's changed. They were born with information readily accessible. So it's to be expected that with the information at the tip of their finger, they're doing, to your point, their research and they know who you are. And
Hmm.
they can afford to be a little bit pickier, if we can put it that way, right?
Hmm.
They're making
Hmm.
educated decisions about the jobs and the organizations they're choosing to work
Hmm.
for. Mm,
And I am seeing a little bit too, almost a healthy amount of skepticism towards corporate
yeah.
culture as well. And it's a little bit more guarded. They really want to be sure about the choices that they're making.
Which is a really good thing, right? Because
Hmm.
this is an important decision. It's choosing to begin a relationship because that's what it is. Like that's how we define
Hmm.
employee engagement. It's your emotional commitment to the
Yeah.
organization you work for, and that's translating into a relationship. So there needs to be trust that all these beautiful values that every company has on their website is
Yeah.
actually carried inside the organization and translated in how people behave, right? So they're
Hmm.
going check websites. They're going to go on Glassdoor. They're going to sneak on LinkedIn and check for employees that or people they
Hmm.
may know or be connected to so that they can share their experience working with that organization. Like they want to know that you're walking the talk, right?
Absolutely.
In your experience, what makes Gen X switch jobs?
I mean, speaking specifically to Gen X, I think it's a broad conversation about a
Yeah.
decision to switch jobs, and we could easily fall into some traps or stereotypes that we make about generations
Mhm.
and those things. I mean, I did a bit of research to prepare for this, and it's easy to go on Google and kind of look up, oh, what's important to Gen X
Right.
and what's important to Gen Z. I think we can all do that kind of research, and of course, every generation is marked by maybe historical or cultural events that shape certain attitudes, but we are much more complicated as individuals than that, right? So we're also shaped by our culture, our upbringing, and our phase of life.
Hmm.
Where am I at in my life? My age, my career. what am I looking for from work? So um, I think it's tough to say, this is what's going to appeal
Hmm.
specifically to a Gen X employee. But let's say those that are born somewhere between the mid 60s and the 1980s, they're at their youngest in their early 40s now, mid 40s, and you might kind of see them almost as a sandwich generation
Yeah.
sometimes because they have aging parents,
Hmm.
youngish children or adult children who are staying home longer as well.
Yes.
So they're taking care of sometimes parents, they're taking care of children at the same time. And they might want to switch jobs to somewhere where they feel that their security, their fulfillment, their independence is recognized and rewarded. And for some, that could even mean, becoming entrepreneurs themselves to best leverage their own autonomy
Hmm.
and to the experience that they've gathered over the years. So I think that there's also a flexibility that's needed and recognition like anybody else is looking for from work. So offering space for that time with family,
Hmm.
for that work-life balance, especially if you're taking care of uh, two generations around you, and maybe even a chance to mentor some younger folks,
Yeah.
um, be recognized as true experts in their field. After this point, they've gathered a considerable amount of experience, and now it's how can we support the next generation of workers without feeling like we're in competition with them necessarily. So,
Absolutely. You're
yeah.
right. And like what resonates in what you said is we're all shaped by a bunch of different things, right? But I'll add to the mix our experiences in life, what we've gone through,
Hmm.
places we've been, traveled to, and our work experience as well.
Hmm.
And that influences who we are as people and brings us to where we are today. But at the end of the day, you're right, it's more than a generation, and falling into the trap of those stereotypes is a trap. At the
Hmm.
end of the day, we have to also remember that these are human beings, right?
Hmm.
And they have needs, and some of those needs could be common because they belong to a certain generation. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's shaped by people, what their needs are, what their experience is, and what their current context is. To your point, is if
Hmm.
they have they're in between, kind of managing young teenagers, young adults, but also taking care of elderly parents, and how that's different from a Gen X or a Gen Z. That has
Hmm.
a different life context. It's about acknowledging that these people are different and they're more than just a generation or an age.
Hmm. Yeah.
What do you feel those different generations are looking for in terms of work environment, culture, challenges, perks? Dare I talk about perks?
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting thing to consider is what is the ideal work environment that's going to attract different generations. And I would almost want to come back a little bit to that life phase thing. And the comparison that I would make is with, if you've ever taken those kind of tests to see what kind of investing profile you have. And if you're wanting to put money into an RRSP that's based on a certain level of risk profile,
Right.
what level of risk tolerance do you have? And this changes as we get older, and the focus becomes on different things. So if you're in a phase of life where you're a young parent, what might be important in terms of perks and culture is somewhere that has good healthcare,
Right.
rewards, um, good health, and respects the family
Hmm.
as well. Provides maybe access to financial advice.
Hmm.
I mean, telemedicine, we've seen
Oh,
a
yes.
lot of growth of telemedicine as well. And I can't imagine how helpful that's been for a lot of young parents
I
as
confirm.
well. The steadiness of the income, those things
Mhm.
are more important when we have a young family.
Mhm.
For someone a little bit older, then it's maybe more about the retirement planning. So we're never too young to start talking about it.
No.
But legal advice advice, access to short or long-term disability, as we start to be more concerned about what unexpected health situations could come up for us,
Yes.
and the event of illness being protected, preventative health, and maybe more generous vacation planning as well. As we start to get a little bit older, maybe we've been in the hustle for a little bit and we're ready to take some more time off. So more generous vacation package might be more interesting as a perk.
Mhm.
But I think for anyone, and for younger folks in particular, career development is something that's
Yeah.
that's super important. Having an engaging and stimulating place to work, to be heard, to have the flexibility, the chance to explore, maybe work from abroad.
Mhm.
That's what we're hearing about a lot from, in particular, more younger workers.
Absolutely. That flexibility to define where we work, you know,
Hmm.
as our relationship to the traditional workplace has definitely shifted and it's opened doors in so many ways, right? In the diversity that it brings to your talent pool as you're able to pretty much recruit from
Absolutely.
everywhere and you can like those barriers are now gone. It's for so many companies it's now easier to allow for these working arrangements to exist. I have some colleagues that have worked for a couple of months in Mexico, others in Europe, and it works out
Hmm.
fine because we now have that flexibility thanks to the positive impact of shifting to remote work
Hmm.
after the pandemic. But you're right, those expectations have absolutely changed. We haven't
Hmm.
touched on we've talked about environment and perks and all of that. What about culture? Expectations as to the workplace culture, how people behave, how leaders show up. What are your thoughts and observations about that?
I think it is anecdotal, but having the space to exchange with senior leaders uh, is a lot more the norm and the expectation
Mhm.
these days. So having the accessibility to both share and exchange with senior leaders.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we're good at LG too. But I think a lot of companies are making the effort, seeing a lot of, especially in the past couple of years, more and more employers focusing more on having town halls and having those kind of forums and ways to exchange without having the impression of having an exclusive club where if you get promoted to a certain level, then you're part of this exclusive club with the corner office that's kind of going out the window a little bit,
Yeah.
and it's I think that is the expectation,
Mm-hmm.
and to get out of the little box that we've made for ourselves of what does our career look like, and
Mm-hmm.
be more accepting that we are individuals and we can bring different parts of ourselves to work, being bringing our creative pursuits, sharing more about what our lives are outside of work. I'm starting to see those barriers kind of break down a little bit. People being more real, if you will.
Well, work becoming more human. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the most beautiful consequences of the shift that happened with the pandemic. It was a struggle in the beginning, but we were brought to acknowledge that we needed to talk about mental health and bringing our whole selves to
Hmm.
work and distress and stress and isolation in the workplace. They became more common topics, and that's a good
Yeah.
thing because in the end, it brings us back to who we are before being workers or whatever role we have in our lives, parents, wives, husbands, friends.
Hmm.
The common denominator here is that we're all human. And
Hmm.
this is who shows up at work. We try to hide it or not.
Yeah.
Our backpack is full of
Yep.
things that happened before and during and after. And it's the same for when we shut down from work and we close our computers at night. There's no separation anymore. And that comes with
Hmm.
challenges. But one of the greatest consequences is it became more human.
Yeah.
Um, Amazing. You said something about LG2 being exceptional at providing accessibility to senior leadership.
Mhm.
Dare I ask that you tell me more? I'm curious for those stories.
So it's something that I've picked up on a lot. I walk around, I see senior leaders as much as anyone. I could see our CEO walking around, and it's not, there's no formalism
Yeah.
about it, and it doesn't need to be so complicated. And we do have some coffee chats that we have. We had one recently with it was almost a ask me anything
Yeah.
scenario with our CEO, which was really great, and it gave him a chance to really answer questions that people had on all different types of topics at work. But it doesn't need to be that necessarily on a day-to-day basis. Just knowing that the people who have the responsibility or the leadership burden of helping propel LG2 forward are there just as much as anyone else. And we can share our ideas with them, and we don't need to set up a complicated way for that to happen. And
Yeah.
that's something that really stood out to me.
And that's beautiful. There's no need for red tape. Like at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
why just get lost in all of these hierarchies and formal ways of communicating when, again, we're just people doing what we
Mm-hmm.
do, doing what we love, hopefully. Um, and that's it. Why would we impose those barriers when they don't need to exist, you know?
Yeah.
The successful companies I've seen in my experience, have done that. Just that. They've walked the floors, they've been close to their people, their listening is always on, and they've provided this they've led with this idea of a culture
Mm-hmm.
of accessibility and everyone's welcome and we value your point of view.
Yeah.
Everyone like and we look for that diversity, but we also include that diversity in the way that we lead and show up to work.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Shall we move on to talking about our second theme? We wanted to dig into how we're keeping those different generations engaged. So let's talk about engagement and
Mm-hmm.
retention, the thing everyone's trying to do right now with talent, the talent market just being so tight. I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to hear your thoughts about different factors of engagement, retention for those different generations.
Yes. And I think there is part of it that, again, like when we think about the life phase and the realness of being humans at work, it's keeping those doors open to hearing what's on your mind, what's important to you as a person at work. Empowering managers also to have those kind of conversations
Mhm.
with their team members, and to know that it's okay to do that, regardless of the generation. And that transparency, I think, needs to be honored.
Yeah.
Um, Being inclusive, and here we're talking about the sense of uh, different generations and being inclusive to their different needs. But of course, inclusivity is much more intersectional than that. And having trust in people, knowing that most people, when they show up to work, they don't say, today I would like to be just ordinary. That most people don't come into work with that mindset. That you have to trust that people are doing their best, and have benevolence and respect for who we're working with. And I think those are intergenerational expectations of the workplace. Um, but that being said, the younger generations, the Gen Zs that are entering the workforce, younger millennials, they have a little bit more leverage, maybe, in encouraging their employers to respect these standards as
Mhm.
well. Um, the I guess the leverage is one, but also the social awareness
Yeah.
is a lot more present. I find these days.
I agree. I definitely agree. It's been I've had the same observation, and employers need to adapt to that, right? And react
Hmm.
in a positive way, not seeing it as
Hmm.
a threat, but also more as an opportunity to step up.
Absolutely. I
Right.
think having a certain level of humility about it and saying it's not because I've acquired a certain level of experience or wisdom or whatever that means that I know better, because I don't know about you, JJ, but I learned so much from the younger folks on my team
Agreed.
about things that I'm already out of touch with. It's starting to make me feel a bit old, but um, yeah, I'm ready to learn from them as much as I hope to be able to give.
Well, I agree. Definitely. I'll be 40 in the fall, and like there's so many opportunities for us to look around us and say, I've got so much to learn, whether the person is the same age I am, coming from the same generation, or whether this person is
Hmm.
20 years younger than I can learn as much from them as they can learn from me.
Hmm.
And when you have that growth mindset, which is just seeing everything as an opportunity to learn and grow and not think that
Yeah.
because you're a boomer or an X or whatever, all you have to do is teach other people, right? And you're so
Hmm.
much knowledgeable when you are, but they are too. And it's welcoming
Hmm.
that perspective. And what you said earlier made me think of what's that saying? I may get this wrong. What got us here won't get us there. Is that
Hmm.
um it's realizing
Yeah.
that it doesn't mean that to the point of the saying, it's you have to adapt to different ways of doing things, and I think the way to do that is just being curious and asking questions and
Hmm.
having a true research mindset to understand what are those expectations, what is this
Hmm.
context, and why is this happening, and how can that be a good thing? How can we see
Hmm.
that as an opportunity and not just a challenge?
Yeah, the importance of staying curious too. It's essential, I think, as a skill for people, for organizations to learn. There
Right.
was someone who asked me once at work. I asked them a question. I don't even remember what it was about, and she picked up on something there, and she said, "What is the question behind your question?" And when she asked me that, I realized there was a whole thought behind the question that I was asking that I wasn't sharing.
Ah,
And her asking me that really changed the conversation and allowed us to go deeper. And I've started to try and do that. Shout out to Olivia, who asked me that question. But uh, I've started to incorporate that a little bit, even if I don't say it out loud all the time. I
right.
kind of start to think, okay, when I'm having a conversation with someone, they ask me something, is it I'm taking this at face value,
Mhm.
or I staying curious and like, let's dig deeper to find out what's the underlying question here.
You're right, and I love that you said that because there's such a huge power behind what I call follow-up questions. Things like, tell
Hmm.
me more. What do you have in mind? Why are you asking this question? Or all of these wonderful prompts create and
Hmm.
make room for such a deeper discussion. And I feel that when you ask questions, there's this concept of a third door that opens, right? Because
Hmm.
if you and I are talking, you see a door, I see a door. But when we're curious and we go deeper and try and understand the other person's perspective or needs or opinion, I feel this space creates a third door that may not have
Hmm.
existed had we stayed focused on I am opening door one, you're opening door two.
Hmm.
There's so much richness in asking those questions, and I wish more leaders did that. And when
Hmm.
I mean everyone at all levels, not just people who manage
Hmm.
people, all leaders.
If
Okay.
I could make a tie in there too
Yeah.
around the question of communicating between generations and that curiosity.
Mhm.
Um, some of the stereotypes that we hear more around younger generations is, um, they're asking for this, that, and the other thing at work, and we can never do enough as companies. And I think that's at face value. Why are people asking for something? Why is it something that's important to them? And you can build around that. And the example I could give is, let's say you're an organization that you're employees are asking for short-term disability insurance, and it's not something that you offer, and you don't think you'll be able to offer it in the short term. Why are they asking for it? What are the
Behind.
questions? What are the issues that are leading to that? And what can you offer instead in the short term that might help to alleviate some of those pressures and those concerns on people? So, I mean, short-term disability insurance, it's one example, but there are so many different ways that can dig deeper to find out why without considering that your younger team members or younger generations are necessarily demanding or requiring more or unreasonable expectations.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. I completely agree. Well, speaking to that point, how do you, in concrete ways, get to understand those different generational needs or different employee needs? Let's just put that down to a common denominator. How are
Mm-hmm.
you able to do that?
Ask the questions, I guess. Ask the questions, and you'll get answers. But you have to be ready to hear those answers. So we use Office Vibe, and the previous organization I worked with used Office Vibe. We loved it because it's great. It gives us real time feedback, uh, and we've also learned to kind of pace to not be too reactive to the kind of feedback that we get, because that's the key is be ready to hear what people have to say if you're going to ask. It's not necessarily having a prepared answer or response for everything. It's
Hmm.
just a matter of, okay, allow people a space to share, and then you can build something that represents your team, and the great people that you have hopefully represent the great people that you would want to join and to add and build to your corporate culture. So I think finding the right ways to be able to get that feedback in a reasonable way that's sustainable as well.
And I'm imagining, like, at this the size of your organization, 500 people, you have to slice and dice that data, right? And try and
Mm-hmm.
understand like how different groups, whether that's comparing older tenure employee, younger tenure employee,
Mm-hmm.
women, men, those who have
Mm-hmm.
families, those who don't, and all of that is a way to really get to segment the information basically and better
Yes.
understand. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts? Yeah.
Absolutely. Segmenting kind of the demographic and um, building around that.
Yeah.
LG2, we have a lot of women. Previous places I've worked, it just worked out that way that there was a majority of women that compose the workforce. So, what are healthcare plans that respond to women's health, for example, and uh, building based on the people that you have working for you, but hearing them out also, not making assumptions about
Absolutely.
because you fit in this segment. This is what's important for you.
There's a saying that we use in research that what you said made me think of that saying is the data will answer what questions, like what
Mm-hmm.
are the expectations, but you'll need to dig in and ask qualitative questions to understand
Mm-hmm.
why. Why can't always be answered by data. And to your point, you have to listen and you have to ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You talked earlier about a key factor of attraction and retention for younger employees being progression, career progression,
Yeah.
development, learning, growth. I'd love to hear you on how you make sure that this younger generation progresses without making older employees feel like they're pushed aside. What
Yeah, I think
about doing
it's so important to be able to put people in partnership together,
that?
to learn from. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but uh, giving them a chance to learn from one another and putting them together on projects, on
Yeah.
creative endeavors, and uh, having that development be organic in a sense. and it needs to be in a way that is meaningful and not necessarily transactional. Um, that's maybe one of the challenges sometimes that we see with a more remote first uh, reality that we've been working in for the past few years is it's it's been a bit more challenging to not have transactional type of relationships or
Yes.
transactional conversations. But if you have a meaningful way for people to come together and to work together, then you can really uh, put people in partnership
Yeah.
and have them learn. And one thing that we did recently at LG2 is something that we called Helium, which is where we worked on a project, and it was a kind of a 2 day thing where all of our creative workforce and others as well who volunteered were able to work on a campaign. And it was a real campaign, but essentially it was a competition. So different teams were all working on this one campaign, and then there was a selection committee and also a popular vote for who the winners would be. And it gave a chance to people who didn't normally work together to work together, people from different backgrounds and different expertise to work together and different generations.
Mm.
And I think that really helped break down maybe some of the walls that we create for ourselves in terms of who we hang out with at work, uh, who we feel more comfortable with. So creating ways for those things to happen. A lot of tech companies, they have hackathons
Mm.
where you have that same sort of idea, right? Is get together and build something and get outside of your day to day, but also collaborate with different people and people with different experiences.
I love that. You bring back memories. So I used to be the HR director for this tech company in Montreal called Triton, and I was there for close to 9 years. And we did what we called Triton Days, which is exactly the equivalent of what you described. And we would come together. We would do it. I think there's a year we did it twice, but basically there was a challenge where we were looking to solve a real problem, a real solution. And sometimes we would let the employees just come up with a problem they wanted to solve, whether it was in respect to our experience as employees, improving the workplace, connecting people together, or solving like a product challenge, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a product company. And that's exactly what it created. Triton Days became a tradition where we broke down these walls and we allowed to step outside of our regular role and regular
Yeah.
tasks. And, let's face it, we mostly still work with pretty much
Mm-hmm.
the same people every day. Our connections are limited. And it provided this opportunity to not only be creative, but come together on a challenge
Mm-hmm.
or something that we wanted to solve and be creative about it, and then create those connections that we don't normally have the opportunity to build in our
Mm-hmm.
everyday work experience. And it was like a highlight of the culture. People loved doing that, and they're talking about it for days after and months after, and there were memories of it. And it became part of something that we mentioned when we were asked from new candidates to describe what it was
Yeah.
like to work there. That's one of the top things that people were talking about. Like, it was a powerful moment, right?
It's so true. And I think about the times where I had the most growth in my career is there are two things. There was having the mentorship and leadership of more senior members of my team that let me get a bit more hands-on and in a safe way. And then also having another safe way to get outside of my comfort zone and to be sometimes needed to be pushed.
Yeah.
But it was okay to do it, and it was okay to make mistakes, and it's okay not to get something perfect uh, the first time. So having that space to try something different um, really helps push the development to a next step.
It does. You're absolutely right. Um, I've been to a couple of HR conferences lately, and there is so much talk about what we call RTO, so return to office.
Yeah,
It's like the
it's a
topic,
hot topic.
the hot topic next to DEI. I mean, everyone's talking about return to office.
Hmm.
The power of acronyms, RTO. Um,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts about what makes those different generations want to go to the office? Yes.
it's a complicated
It's the tough
topic.
cookie.
Yeah, yeah, and I get the perspective of both employees and companies and trying to have this happen and reaching a point where we're feeling maybe impatient about it, and so we
Mhm.
kind of push something and it's not well received necessarily, but it's a very complicated topic,
Yes.
and I think it's tough for people to navigate after what we've kind of been through over the past few years, and it's really changed the way that we work. Um, and I think it all kind of boils down to, regardless of the generation, that you have something that you find fulfilling at the office that you can't
Mhm.
have necessarily at home. Um, it's not going to be snacks because we have snacks at home.
Although they're
Um,
great, I mean,
yeah,
we can buy ourselves our own snacks.
yeah. And I think it's going to be the way being at the office makes us feel.
Yes.
And if it's feeling intimidating or we have apprehension about it, then it's it's normal that that experience might not be the most fulfilling right away, and sometimes we kind of have to dig into the why a little bit there. And for different generations, it could mean different things too. So
Mhm.
um, I'm seeing it a little bit too with people who have been in the company for a certain period of time, or for different generations who are always exposed to the office. And in some way, I kind of feel that myself a little bit,
Mhm.
um, to have a kind of craving for like the way it was before. And we talk about the before times, and we feel more productive, maybe, and we feel more at home at the office. Uh, and that return is a little bit easier, perhaps. But for younger folks, especially those who are just coming out of school, they never had to work in an office full time before.
No.
They even finished their studies remotely, maybe. And I think of some younger hires that we made in the more recent years, and this was one of their first experiences. So they never had to come in full time, and they need to discover what's meaningful or fulfilling about coming to the office as a gathering place, to be reassured that it's a welcoming place to be. I mean, we're asking people to commute, to spend time that they didn't have to spend before. So why is this a meaningful place to be? And I think it's a tough cookie. Um,
It is. But yeah, that's to your point. What's the compelling argument, right? What are these people going to
mhm,
experience? And I love how you said uh, how it makes them feel to go in the office.
mhm,
Yes, there's the purpose, but when they leave, was that experience a fulfilling one for them and one that will want to make them return, right? Because there's a lot of benefits into having the
mhm,
flexibility to work from home or from abroad or anywhere you want to and from the office, and catering to those different needs at different moments for different people is really important to keep them
mhm.
engaged, right? Because it's a huge factor.
Yeah.
I'd love to close this theme by asking you how you reconcile varying needs and expectations in building your employee experience at LG2.
Mhm. We could talk a little bit about the office experience as one example, because the LG2 office moved during the pandemic, and part of that redesign of the office was consulting our team members to see what was important for them, and having that space reflect what would be meaningful for them at work. And I think incorporating that feedback loop in the employee experiences is so important. So, we set up kind of a quiet space called La Retraite for people. So when they're off at the office, they have a chance to unplug and go into
A little
a
retreat.
silent space.
Yeah.
Making sure that we have an AV set up that makes sure that people can communicate in a flexible way. That it's easy to be remote, maybe come into the office halfway through the day,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. And keep building that and keep having that momentum going regardless of the project, but also having a common thread around it. So for LG2, it's making sure that we stick to our values and that we have this be common throughout the different projects that we take on. For our total rewards planning, for our total compensation, making sure that it sticks to our values and what we're looking to achieve.
Absolutely.
And for the first time, we're starting to see people who are moving towards retirement and making sure that reflects as well our values of transparency and keeping the conversation going. Um, just ensuring that as a company, you've identified those values, what's core,
Hmm.
and sticking to it and kind of communicating with that common thread and having it be the guide for what comes next.
Hmm. I agree. It's making sure also that these values are present at all key
Mm-hmm.
moments of your employee
Mm-hmm.
experience. To your point, a common thread, right? And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of value in that consistency because it'll 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 translate in the way people feel about their experience, regardless of where
Mm-hmm.
they are in their journey or what generation they belong to. It's a
Mm-hmm.
coherent experience
Mm-hmm.
because it's aligned to your DNA as a company,
Mm-hmm.
your values.
And
Beautiful.
regardless of what they do next, too, whatever their next career experience is, they'll always remember
Yes,
this as a distinct and unique experience in their career.
absolutely. Beautiful. So let's talk about motivating these different generations to working together because it is something that's incredibly rich to have all of
Mm-hmm.
these experiences and backgrounds and that beautiful diversity come together on building
Mm-hmm.
projects or products or providing services, regardless of what we do as an organization. I'd love to hear you on how, because at the core we know that everything boils down to how people communicate with one another. How do you facilitate communications between the different
Mm-hmm.
generations in your workplace?
I think it comes down to like two elements maybe that we've chatted a little bit about already is
Yeah.
pairing people together in a certain way
Mhm.
and having that be a space that ideally is not transactional,
Mhm.
and not leaning too hard into the stereotypes that we have, or that we've heard. For example, younger generation doesn't want to come into the office. It's something that we hear, but it's in reality, is that it? There's more to it, and maybe by working together, we learn more about what's preoccupying the humans that are in front of us. And I think we all heard that conversation maybe 10 or so years ago about millennials.
Mhm.
Millennials didn't want to work hard, didn't want to do anything, didn't have ambition, wanted to be rewarded for everything. I find we're just displacing that conversation in time a little bit. And uh, I remember hearing myself those kinds of things,
Mhm.
several years ago, and looking around at the people I was working with or that I knew in my personal life, and I thought, I don't know anybody who's like that or who fits in that box. Um, but knowing them was the key to knowing what was important to the people that we're working with. So keeping the lines of communication open, as you said, JJ, it's so important.
It's key.
Um, so finding ways to make sure that people don't um, get siloed off, giving them autonomy, but also a chance to share what they know, what they're working on, um, and not having people stray too far into the path of never having to speak with anyone, because I think that that was something we saw a little bit in the earlier days of the pandemic too. We weren't sure how to communicate, so either we tried to force it too much,
Mm-hmm.
or people kind of went off and did their own things, and there was a sense of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're moving past it gradually a little bit now, but finding ways to connect people is so important, and create and learn from each other.
Agreed. And I feel, to add to what you said, that managers can be great catalysts for that
Hmm.
to happen. I know
Hmm.
they've got a lot on their shoulders, but their key responsibility is making sure that their team has the condition to be an engaged and performing one. And so they can facilitate those conversations, they can provide that space, they can create a forum where there is room for those open discussions,
Hmm.
where everyone's input is valued and recognized. Some of the responsibilities on them, but I'll also add that I feel that it's a shared one also.
Yeah.
Employees also share that responsibility, and HR also has a role
Hmm.
as enablers and creators of maybe the context, and then providing the different tools and methods and
Hmm.
all that good stuff. But it's a shared responsibility between all of the actors
Hmm.
within the employee experience and the organization. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, communication is two-way street,
Yeah.
and managers haven't had it easy
No.
lately. Uh, yes, they're working with multi-generational workforce. They're maybe coming into their own as managers for the first time in like a kind of different work context too. And we've all heard the buzzwords around great resignations and quiet quitting and things like that. And as a manager, that's really hard to navigate.
Hmm.
And sometimes I think it's hard for managers not to get into their own heads about it a little bit. And what it comes down to, I think, it's my opinion, but fundamentally, it's just talk to your people and um, hear them out, and it's not so hard if you don't overthink it. Um, yeah,
Just be genuine about it. Just be curious
yeah,
to understand who that person in front of you is. Get to know them as people. And it's not
hmm,
rocket science. If you're just
hmm,
genuinely curious and authentic in getting to know them, it'll
hmm,
create a space where you have that trust. And the dialogue that you have with this employee will be that much richer, and
hmm,
everything else will become easier. Aligning on goals and expectations and having tough conversations is easier when you have that trust, and you build that
hmm,
trust by genuinely caring for your people.
yeah,
It takes time, it's hard, and I definitely feel for managers, because let's say you have a team of 10. Spending that quality time and investing
hmm,
that time into, your one-on-one rituals, let's say, is something that pays off in the end.
hmm,
But it's incredibly difficult, because it's like a family, right? And I have 3 kids. They're all incredibly different, even though 2 of them are twins. Ben and Alex could not be more different another. And my job as a parent is similar in ways that I find is I have to
hmm,
appreciate and get to know them for who they are, and not
hmm,
say, okay, well, that's true for both of you. No, they react differently. One is more empathetic, the other one is a little bit more self-centered. I have to speak to him differently, because it's
hmm,
the same thing doesn't resonate. It's the same thing for any type of your human relationship. And I feel for
hmm,
managers who have to adapt to different people with different backgrounds. Some have, past experiences that are
hmm,
following them, and that has an impact on how they behave and show up at work. Some value recognition, some value
hmm,
collaboration much more. Some want to be challenged in certain ways, whereas others aren't comfortable with you giving a certain type of feedback in a certain way. And then again, it
hmm,
all boils down to getting to know your people. And when you do, everything
hmm.
falls into place.
It's so true. And I would even say not putting the pressure so much on getting it perfect every time.
Exactly.
And not saying, oh, I'm gonna adapt my communication style and make sure that I really, really get this conversation right. Sometimes it's not going to go the way that we planned.
No.
Or sometimes the person's going to live certain emotions about the topics that you're talking about, or you hit a nerve, and
Yep.
it's it's a moment. We'll pass through it. I think
Yeah.
managers tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves to deliver on all fronts every time, and it's it's just not so simple.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody expects you to be perfect. We would never expect
Hmm.
that of each other, right?
Yeah.
As human beings. And so being okay with that and saying, like acknowledging a moment is like, whoa, that came off wrong. Like that's not what I how did I what I say, how did it land with you? Like asking those validation questions, just it's acknowledging that moment and being okay with the fact that it's not perfect and no one expects you
Hmm.
to be. And it's if it's true for the manager, it's true for the team members too, and for HR and for CEOs in all different roles.
Hmm.
We're all human
Hmm.
beings. It doesn't matter, and we can acknowledge that in a space where we say, "All right, well that sucked." You know, and it's okay. And I feel that
Hmm.
vulnerability is also a key ingredient in building that
Hmm.
relationship of trust.
Hmm.
All right, where are we at here? I'd love to hear you on this question that I had in our backlog. What's the impact on project output and quality when you're able to rally different generations working together?
Hmm.
What do you feel it creates as an outcome?
I mean, it's a creation of value ultimately.
Yeah,
Um, Everything is going to, and I love what you said earlier about the third door, right?
yeah,
If you're putting different generations together and people are coming in with the right mindset about it, of let's think win-win, then you have the possibility to add and create much more than just compromise
mm,
or be in competition, which it's not helpful for an organization and it's not helpful for a team.
mhm,
So when you can rally those generations to work together, you're tapping into the diversity of experiences
mhm.
and perspectives. We made the comparison earlier about maybe wisdom or experience um, at work and social awareness and social media savvy that younger folks have. Put those things together and you're able to create something much more interesting. So
Mhm.
as long as you can kind of set the ground rules
Mm.
about it, that we need to come into the conversation with an open mind,
Yes.
and that we need to have a safe place to challenge one another with acceptance and with openness. And it's not a matter of just saying this is a safe space. You have to walk the talk a little bit
Mhm.
to keep that open mind, not be too reactive, be open to different perspectives, and
Mhm.
help bring some fresh ideas to the table. And um, reinforces also the idea that every participant is relevant to the conversation. And I think it helps to push companies further. It helps to push teams further when they're able to acknowledge that and really um, not be in a situation necessarily of debate, or if the debate is healthy, then great. But what are we looking to build?
Mhm. I think that being very explicit about that whenever entering, like whether it's a team meeting or it's a brainstorming session or whatever project that you're working on. When I was a coach for development teams, one of the things that we used to do in the beginning of a retrospective where we would look back on the last sprint. I'm talking maybe lingo for some people, in the agile way of building product.
Mm-hmm.
But we would have that kind of a preamble to the meeting and say,
Yeah.
we're walking into this meeting really with a statement of saying like this is a space where we want everyone's perspective to come to the table.
Mhm.
And we know that everybody came in with the best of intentions and we're not here to judge. Like being really explicit about what it is
Mhm.
that we're trying to accomplish and the fact that we do want all these perspectives to come to the table and build on top of each other.
Mhm.
So instead of saying things like, yes, but blah, 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 turn that into yes, and I want to add this and that. And
Mhm.
when you're able to do that, to your point, we create so much more creativity and you're really tapping into everyone's strengths and values
Mhm.
um, in such a meaningful and
Mhm.
positive outcome, basically. And you're able to better serve the needs of your customers more likely because you have all of
Mhm.
these perspectives around the table. Let's say you're putting together a campaign and it's built by a bunch of, 40-year-old white men. Well,
Mhm.
you're probably missing a perspective of how a 20-year-old female would think about this or members
Mhm.
of different communities and how your message is resonating. If you have those different diverse perspective around the table, you're able to
Mhm.
anticipate those reactions and adapt the message. And anyways, I agree with you. It's so much value.
We talk a lot about culture fit versus culture add, and
Yes.
that question of, are we looking for somebody who fits the culture? Or are we
Mhm.
looking for somebody who builds and helps us get a step further? And I think that only comes through diversity of opinions, of backgrounds, of values, of ages, um, lived experiences. It's so important, and I think it's a crucial step for companies to have that awareness and not fall into let's do more of the same, because like you
Exactly.
said, what got us here won't get us there.
Absolutely. What a beautiful way to end our amazing conversation. Is there anything you'd like to add to what we talked about today? Is there anything that you feel we should deep dive into a little bit more?
Honestly, we talked a lot about a bunch of different things. I don't think we were limited to
No.
just generations at work, and I think it's much more complicated
Mhm.
than that. And we maybe hit the tip of the iceberg
Yeah.
today. We could probably talk about it for hours more, and think it's a topic that's really something that we're both passionate about, and um, it's exciting to see also a lot of the exchange about it, and thought leadership around career development and what it means for different generations and what it means in our current workplace context. So, I mean, at some point, I think I'll have to rein myself in a little bit, because we could talk about it forever. But
Sure.
um, what I would like to say is I want to also be humble about, I'm coming in with my experience, with my reality, a limited maybe number of years of experience, and um, there's a lot to learn, and I think we're learning every day. And so I will continue to keep learning and be humble on that journey, but I would never pretend to be arrogant or an expert in the matter, because I think keeping an open mind to what's next is key.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you so, so much for sharing all your thoughts and your experience and stories. I really enjoyed our conversation and I hope you did
Likewise.
as well. Great.
Yes,
All right, so let's close on our famous vibe check question. How are you doing, really?
I am doing fantastic. It was so lovely speaking with you today, JJ, and um, the nerves that and butterflies that I had at the beginning are long gone, and I'm really looking forward. I feel like I could take on the world now, ready to come back to my regular work day and keep engaging with the wonderful people that we have, and yeah,
Then
looking
our
forward to the
job is
next steps.
done. you're in this conversation energized. And so if everyone listening to this episode can have the same feeling after watching us and hearing us talk, well then our work is done. Let's go take a break. Thank you so, so much, Martine. It was a true pleasure to have this discussion with you. And thank you for being our guest.
Thank you so much for inviting me, JJ. I'll come back anytime.